Why do reviewers have to compare every single fantasy movie or show to Game of Thrones and The Last Airbender? Do people not realize that fantasy existed before either of those two came out? Drew here, and if you don't mind young adult stories and trope-laden storytelling, I feel like Shadow and Bone, the new Netflix original series, is a pretty good time. I think it's way better than most Netflix fare. I think this is probably going to be one of their big hits when it's all said and done. It has great production values that they really hold together pretty well. I don't think that the seams show too much. I think that there's a fantastic cast. There's great set designs that are very, very heavily Russian influenced and really do a good job contributing to the world building. The costumes are fantastic and so pleasant to look at. The score really has a pulse and really just keeps you excited for the scenes even when things aren't moving that quickly. And just the special effects are really well executed. There were a few times where the special effects were a little bit shaky, particularly in the scenes that take place in this dark barrier that they crossed called the Fold. But otherwise, I thought the special effects for the most part looked really well executed, and this gives me a lot of hope for what we might see going forward in fantasy series. Now, there's one crucial issue with this series that I think really undercut a lot of its biggest moments, and that's that instead of just telling the original story of Shadow and Bone, which was written by Leigh Bardugo, they also incorporate these characters from another novel taking place in the same universe that she created called Six of Crows. And to me, that was a mistake. I think that they should have done two separate series for these characters, because I think that there's two very wildly different stories going on in terms of tonality and in terms of what is the type of story. And to me, the incorporation of the two just wasn't very smooth, and it often undercut the big moments in both stories. And I think that people would have been happy to watch a spin-off show about Kaz Brekker and Jesper and these other characters. I think, though, that having these two stories, so basically one story you've got this, the more young adult focused story that focuses on Alina Starkov, played by Jessie Leigh, and she's this young woman who is in the army, and she has a close relationship with someone she's known since her childhood named Mal, played by Archie Renaux. And it's not necessarily a romantic relationship, but not necessarily a platonic relationship. I feel like Mal is kind of this combination of Peeta Mellark and Gale Hawthorne from the Hunger Games, all wrapped up into one person with either their best qualities or their worst qualities, depending on who you ask. I think they've done a lot of work to make him a more likable character here than he is in the novel by Leigh Bardugo. I think they've gotten rid of some of his more negative tendencies that he displayed in the novel. Anyway, so she's in this kind of friendship / romance with Mal, when all of a sudden, lo and behold, it comes out that she's a Grisha, that she has these powers. And not only is she a Grisha, she's essentially has this power that no one has ever seen before, and it gives this general, Kirigan, played by Ben Barnes, hope that they might be able to overcome the Fold, which, as I mentioned before, is this dark barrier that is separating several different kingdoms. So he takes her with him to train her, and as she finds her place in this world, there's twists, there's action, there's lots of compelling moments, and all that is interesting. But then on top of that, they tried to fit in this other story, which within 10 minutes they're already cutting away to this, which is a big mistake to me because it really undercuts Alina's story, and it made it hard for me to get into the other story because I was so focused on Alina's story when they kept incorporating them. It gets smoother in the middle, but then at the end again, I feel like it started to feel like it was intruding rather than actually amplifying the other story. It kind of feels like if you were watching Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and there's that scene where Voldemort is revealed and he's trying to kill Harry Potter in the graveyard. It's kind of like if that scene was going on and then underneath the graveyard you had Jack Sparrow and his pirates trying to carry off a heist. And that's kind of the tonality that a lot of this had, where I really felt like the emotional moments, the compelling moments in both stories were undercut by the other stories, but there's just too much cutting back and forth, and it was distracting rather than enhancing. And I feel like it would have been a better decision to not rewrite Six of Crows and then try to incorporate those characters into this story. Now, they're great characters, don't get me wrong. I really liked the characters from both stories, and particularly, I think if anyone is going to be a breakout star from this show, there's so many characters. Most of them are really well played and really, really charismatic actors. I think there might be a few too many characters, to be honest. As I said, I wouldn't have included the Six of Crow crowd because Shadow and Bone, the novel, had a lot of characters already. I don't really think they needed to pull these people in. I think, for instance, Daisy Head's character is really, really interesting and really, really compelling, and I feel like she gets a little bit shortchanged because they're trying to incorporate these other characters. But I think that the two actors in the show that I could really see being breakouts are Kaz Brekker, who is played by Freddy Carter. I think Freddy Carter is fantastic. I think this character that he plays, who's this criminal mastermind who has a bad leg, so he's a disabled person, but his calmness, his coolness, his intelligence, and his heart of gold that shows through in interesting ways, despite the fact that he's in this really, really harsh and unforgiving world. I really thought this character stood out. I also think, though, that his equal in every way was Jesper, played by Kit Young. And I feel like Kit Young, his performance is the most flamboyant performance in the show, probably one of the few flamboyant performances in the show, quite frankly. Is a great contrast, though, to Kaz. And this duo, in many ways, I will understand if people don't like me saying that I would have kept the Six of Crows characters out of this show, because these two characters were two of the best things in this show. But from a narrative standpoint, I don't think they belonged here, even though they were really compelling. And I feel that their plotline just generally tended to be overly confusing, because I think there was a lot of exposition trying to establish things about characters that aren't in the room, as is often the case with heist stories. And you could sort of follow it enough to know what their immediate objective was, but it was oftentimes hard to figure out who was double-crossing who and what their ultimate objectives were. There's twists with both Kaz and Jesper that are hinted at here, but they don't get revealed within this season. So to a certain extent, I feel like these characters don't get their due because they're stuffed into this story. And I feel like it would have been a wiser decision to let them have room to breathe in their own unique story. I don't think that the heists that they're pulling off contribute to the coming-of-age fantasy story that Alina Starkov is going through. So to me, that was a mistake. Otherwise, in this show, though, I think that Jessie Leigh, excellent performance here. I think that I suspect she won't get as much credit for this as she deserves, because I think this is the kind of role that kind of tends to be thankless. Main character, chosen one characters are usually the most boring characters in a show. And it's interesting how much effort they've gone into to make this character more confident than her book counterpart, that they've taken away a lot of the aspects of the character in the book that were more typical of young adult females, such as Bella Swan and Katniss Everdeen, and made her more confident, more self-possessing. And she is very much someone who has agency, who makes her own decisions, and gets to stand up to powerful antagonists. And it's really compelling to get to see. Ben Barnes, I feel like he's not going to be a breakout star of this, although I think he is easily one of the most charismatic performers in it. I just think we've seen him do this kind of work before. He was really good in Westworld, he was really good in Punisher, and now he's really good here in a role that is a little bit difficult to describe without getting into spoilers. But as General Kerrigan, he just possesses so much swagger, so much confidence, and he just has such a mysterious and powerful presence that he really, really dominates the scenes that he's in. Even though he's not in as many scenes as a lot of these other actors, I feel that he was really compelling every time he was on screen. And the way that his story wraps up was one of the more interesting aspects of this whole season. So to me, this season, like, if you like young adult fare, if you're a fan of stuff like Mockingjay and, you know, fantasy series like The Wheel of Time or Harry Potter, this might be for you. You should at least give it a shot. I feel like it starts off pretty well. There's some good action scenes in the first and second episodes, and then there's an excellent twist in episode 5 that I think will have you hooked if you weren't already hooked. On the whole, like I said, I think this is going to be a big hit for Netflix, and I think deservedly so. They've put in the effort this time. I think sometimes they just trust that their audience isn't going to pay the best attention, and they kind of let the plot be slack. But here, there's really, really entertaining situations. Every scene, you see the characters interacting in interesting ways. If there's one problem, like I said, I think it's a little overstuffed, and not everybody gets their due. I think that the world building, I really appreciated the fact that it's not too expositional. You discover the world as the characters discover the world, and there's no conversations where it's just like info dumping for the sake of info dumping, as some other series have done in the fantasy genre. All the information that gets given to you is information that the characters need to keep going in the story. And sometimes this can make the world confusing, and you're like, why can't they explain this a little bit better? But on the whole, I would much rather they went with this approach than that they did the constant info dumping where you're just kind of overwhelmed by all of it. I haven't really talked about Mal, played by Archie Renaux, too much. I feel like I'm definitely rooting for the character. I think that he's likable, but the actor, to me, when among the cast, I feel like he was one of the less charismatic performers, and I was less interested in what was going on with him personally. There's a high degree of subjectivity to this, and oftentimes I find that the people that I think are the best performers are not the people that other people think are the best performers. So it's entirely possible that many of you are like, Mal is the best and Archie is my favorite, but just to me, he didn't quite pop as much as some of these other characters, but I think that the script built him up really well, and I am rooting for his character as a result. I just don't think that he's one of the more charismatic individuals in the story. But those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. Please let me know what you thought in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.